I'm Wendy. I'm a structural engineer, 28 years old. In my family, I was always the strong one, the responsible one. The one who built her own life from the ground up. The one who supposedly didn't need anything. At dinner, my mom slid a white envelope across the polished wood table. Not to me, to my sister, Jessica. Inside, $150,000 for her new house. The room went absolutely silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. My dad didn't hesitate. He just looked right at me, his face flat, cold, and said, "You're the failure. We invest in winners." The air punched out of my lungs. Heat climbed my spine. My jaw locked until it ached. My own father, in front of everyone. He didn't just say it, he declared it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just folded my napkin, placed it on the table, pushed my chair back, and walked out of that house. I never looked back. That night, I didn't just leave. I started something they would never, ever see coming. 2 years later, my sister would drive past my property, slam on her brakes, and scream into the phone. "Dad, you need to come here now. When does family stop being an excuse for cruelty?" That night at the restaurant wasn't an isolated event. It was a summary. The dynamic, the roles we played, they were set in stone decades ago. It started when I was 12. I spent 3 months in our garage, hunched over a card table, meticulously building a suspension bridge. I used nothing but hundreds of drinking straws, fishing wire, and an entire bottle of superglue. My fingers were permanently tacky. The smell of plastic and adhesive hung around me like cheap perfume. I loved it. I loved the precision, the math, the challenge of making something delicate hold weight. It was for the state science fair. On the final day, the judges placed a full 5-pound textbook on the center of my bridge. The straws bowed, the wires went taut, and it held. I won first place. I still remember standing on that makeshift stage in the middle of the high school gymnasium. The lights were hot. The air smelled like floor wax and popcorn. They called my name, Wendy Bennett, and I walked up, my heart hammering. I remember the weight of the medal as they placed it over my head. It was cool against my skin. I stood there, beaming, scanning the front row of metal folding chairs. My eyes moved past the other parents, the flashing cameras, searching for the 2 faces that mattered. 2 empty seats. Right in the front row, just where I'd told them I'd be. A hot, tight feeling closed around my throat. I smiled for the judges, but the joy just deflated. It felt like I'd won in a vacuum. My parents were in Denver that weekend. They'd driven 4 hours to watch my sister, Jessica, compete in a beauty pageant. They'd been gone since Friday. Jessica was 8. She was being judged on her smile, her twirl, and how well she could wave. I was being judged on my mind, my skill, my patience, and my bridge held a textbook. But pageants had trophies, pageants had glitter, pageants made for better stories. I took the bus home alone, the medal heavy in my backpack. When they got back late that night, the house filled with noise. Jessica was exhausted and cranky, but she was carrying a 6-foot-tall Little Miss Sunshine trophy, all gold, plastic, and sparkles. I waited, standing in the living room doorway, holding my blue ribbon and the medal. "I won," I said quietly. Dad glanced up from the TV. His eyes flicked to the medal in my hand, then back to the screen. "Strange girl," he muttered, not to me, but to the room. "What kind of daughter plays with machines?" I waited for my mom to say something, to defend me, to say, "That's amazing, honey." She didn't. She just stroked Jessica's hair, her fingers tracing the sequins on my sister's dress. She helped Jessica lift the giant, glittering trophy onto the fireplace mantel, right in the center. The living room light caught the gold and made it gleam. My medal went into my desk drawer. That moment stuck in my chest like a splinter. It wasn't just the words. It was the crushing, total quiet that followed them. The empty space where love, or at least acknowledgement, was supposed to be. I learned it right then. My achievements were weird. Jessica's achievements were celebrated. How early on do you have to learn that your worth is conditional? That in the eyes of your own family, you are, and always will be, the wrong kind of daughter? As I grew up, I learned that love in my family wasn't a given. It came with receipts. It was transactional. Every favor, every gift, every strained smile, it all depended on whether you made them look good. And Jessica. Jessica made them look great. She was their miracle child. The pretty one, the charming one, the one who got the easy praise, the endless second chances, the bottomless pit of excuses. When she failed a class, it was because the teacher had it in for her. When she got a speeding ticket, it was a speed trap. I wasn't the miracle. I was the backup plan, the strong one. The one who, as my mother always said, could handle it. Which really meant, the one we don't have to help. This wasn't just a feeling, it was policy. When it came time for college, I applied for scholarships. I wrote essays until my hands cramped. I got a partial academic ride, but the rest? That was on me. I worked nights at the campus library, the smell of old paper and floor polish clinging to my clothes. I waited tables on weekends, coming home smelling like fried food, my feet aching, to study for my engineering exams. I paid for every textbook, every lab fee, every late-night pizza that fueled those study groups. I graduated with honors, shouldering my own loans. Jessica wanted to go to a private art school. She missed the application deadline. My dad called a board member he knew. She was in by Monday. They paid her full tuition, her apartment lease, her art supplies, all of it, without blinking. It was an investment in her future. I graduated, found my first job as a structural engineer, and I felt proud, really proud. I was building things, real things that touched the sky. I sent them photos. Me in a hard hat on a construction site, the steel frame of an apartment building cutting into the dawn, a finished bridge, clean and strong, arcing over a river. I was hoping for, I don't know, wow, Wendy, or, that's incredible. The only reply I got was a text from Dad, days later. It was a single line. You still renting? My stomach just twisted. He didn't see the bridge. He didn't see the steel. He didn't see the honors degree, or the hard-won career. He just saw a line item on a balance sheet that didn't read owner. It was another microaggression, a tiny paper cut, reminding me I wasn't measuring up. Every phone call home became a performance review. It was a report card, not on my life, but on how I stacked up against Jessica. I'd call to check in, and before I could even ask how they were, Mom would cut in. Oh, Wendy, you'll never guess. Jessica got another promotion. Jessica's engagement party is going to be at the country club. Jessica just leased a new convertible. You should see the color. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't ask about my projects. They just measured me against her shadow. Was I happy? Didn't matter. Was I fulfilled? Irrelevant. Did I have a new car? A bigger apartment? A ring? No, no, and no. So, in their eyes, I was the failure. For years, I kept trying. I kept sending the photos. I kept calling. I kept hoping that one day, they would finally, actually see me. Not the backup plan, not the strong one. Just me, Wendy. That hope was a stubborn, stupid thing. It survived the empty chairs at the science fair. It survived the, "You still renting?" texts. It survived 1,000 paper cuts of comparison. But that hope finally, mercifully, cracked. The night of the dinner. The night my father looked me in the eye and put a price tag on my worth. We invest in winners. The $150,000 wasn't just a gift for my sister. It was the bill for every time I'd ever disappointed them. When my dad said, "We invest in winners," something inside me didn't just crack, it shut off. It was like a heavy, steel door slamming shut deep in my chest. The part of me that had spent 28 years trying to earn their approval, it just went dark. I stopped chasing them. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped hoping they'd one day wake up and see me. I packed up my apartment in Colorado Springs. I didn't tell them I was leaving. Why would I? They weren't interested in my failures. I sold what I couldn't fit in my car, loaded the rest, and headed back to Denver. There were no dramatic calls, no tearful goodbyes, just the road, the steady hum of the tires on the asphalt, the wipers clearing away the slush. It was the first silence, a silence of subtraction. And I made a promise to myself, right there on I-25, if they wouldn't see my worth, I would build it brick by brick, beam by beam, until the whole world could. But losing my family was one kind of silence. Losing my job was another. It happened on a gray March morning. The kind where the air itself feels tired and cold. The company had been struggling for months, but I kept my head down. I worked hard. I hit my deadlines. I stayed late. I thought I was safe. I was the strong one, right? The one who could handle it. We were all called into the main conference room. The air was stale, thick with the smell of burnt coffee and anxiety. The director stood at the front, his face pale, avoiding eye contact. He read from a list. My name sat right there in the middle. Wendy Bennett. Clean, final, unarguable. I walked out into the snow, the termination letter clutched in my fist. The paper was already getting damp, the ink blurring. The cold hit my face, harder than I expected. For a moment, I just stood on the sidewalk, watching the traffic slide by, wondering, how many times in life can you rebuild from zero? That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the faint reflection of city lights on the dark window. The silence inside wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. The kind that makes every tiny sound, the fridge kicking on, the pipes groaning echo way too loud. I picked up my phone. The screen lit up, showing the Bennett family group chat. A new photo. It was Jessica. Standing in front of her new house, the $150,000 house. She was holding a champagne flute. Our parents beside her, beaming like they'd just won the lottery. The caption, from my mom, read, "So proud of our youngest daughter." I stared at it for a long, long time. The bright, smiling photo, the crushed termination letter on my table, the failure, the winner. Heat rose in my throat. My fingers shook, but my mind was perfectly clear. I typed one last message. Thank you for teaching me to stand on my own, even in the cruelest way possible. I hit send. Then I blocked their numbers. I deleted the chat. I sat there and watched the screen go black. For the first time in my life, there was no audience, no expectations, no one to please, just me. The fear came first, cold and sharp. What if I fail again? What if they were right? But underneath the fear, something small and warm stirred. Freedom. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a plan. But I had a choice. I could spend my days trying to prove them wrong. Or I could build a life that made their opinions completely irrelevant. I made coffee, opened my sketchbook, and drew a simple line, just the outline of a small house. I didn't know it then, but that line would become the first step of everything that came after. The first few weeks after I hit block blurred together. It was a strange, hollow kind of freedom. I'd wake up before dawn, the silence in my apartment absolute. No risk of a passive-aggressive text. No family chat photos to endure, just me. But the silence was also filled with the low-grade hum of panic. My days became a ritual of rejection. I'd sit at my small desk, coffee going cold, and send out resume after resume. I applied everywhere, large-scale structural firms, small drafting studios, even city planning offices. Denver was still limping out of the recession, and the whole city felt frozen. No one was hiring. The rejection emails piled up, all polite and final. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your qualifications are impressive, but my savings started to dwindle. The fear got louder. What if they were right? What if I am the failure? One afternoon, I couldn't stand the apartment anymore. I just grabbed my laptop and walked. I ended up in a part of town I rarely visited and ducked into a small, tired-looking café called Harlan's Corner. The place was sad. The lights were dim, the furniture was chipped, and a faint, lingering smell of burnt espresso and old grease hung in the air. It felt forgotten. I sat in a back booth, the vinyl cracked and taped, half-heartedly working on my portfolio, half wondering how much longer I could pretend I was fine. That's when the owner came over. He was a man in his 60s, silver hair, kind eyes, and hands stained with what looked like wood varnish. He refilled my mug. "You're Wendy Bennett, right?" he asked, his voice quiet. "The engineer?" I looked up, startled. "Used to be," I said, my voice flat. He smiled, a small, weary smile. "Used to be. I could use someone like you." "This place," he gestured around the dim room, is falling apart. And I've got about $1,000 left in the budget to fix it. Interested? $1,000. It wasn't even enough to cover my next month's rent. It was nothing. It was an insult, really. But something in his tone, earnest, trusting, completely without pity, made me pause. I looked around the room, not at the chipped furniture, but at the space. The good bones, as my professors used to say. I saw the layout flaw, the bad lighting, the wasted potential. It was a problem, a tangible problem I could solve with my hands and my mind. Yeah, I said, closing my laptop. I'm interested. For the next 3 weeks, I practically lived at Harlan's. I didn't just consult, I worked. I repainted the walls a warm cream, making the small space feel brighter. I rewired the ancient light fixtures, hanging a few simple pendant lights I'd found at a salvage yard. I designed a new layout that improved the flow from the door to the counter. My engineering brain kicked in. I used reclaimed wood for a new, long counter along one wall, adding bar seating. I covered the entire back wall with cheap, framed mirrors, a classic trick that pulled in the afternoon light and made the tiny cafe feel twice its size. I was covered in paint, my hands had new calluses, and I was exhausted. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I was focused. When it was finished, Harlan stood in the middle of the room, just turning in a slow circle. His eyes were glistening. It feels alive again, he said softly. A week later, a local arts magazine, The Westward, ran a small feature. A forgotten cafe brought back to life by local engineer. It had one photo of me, standing behind the new counter, paint splattered on my jeans, a tired but deeply proud smile on my face. The next morning, I woke up, made my coffee, and opened my laptop. My inbox had exploded, not with rejections, with requests. People asking if I could help redesign their small businesses, their old shops, their homes. I didn't have a company. I just had a sketchbook and a few tools. I said yes to every single one. My life changed. I was no longer an unemployed engineer. I was a design consultant. I was Wendy Bennett, the woman who fixed broken spaces. One successful coffee shop led to a bakery. The bakery led to a small law office. The law office led to a residential project, an old brick house in Golden, just west of Denver, sitting in the shadow of the mountains. I arrived on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, and the first person I met wasn't the owner. It was the man inspecting the foundation. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a deliberate, unhurried confidence. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms lightly dusted with cement, and his eyes were a calm, steady gray, like early winter. He was crouched by a crumbling mortar joint, tapping it with a small hammer. He looked up as I approached, his gaze direct. "You're the designer?" he asked. His voice was deep, quiet. I nodded, feeling suddenly very professional. "Wendy Bennett. And you're?" "Ethan Walker." He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I'm the engineer, making sure this place doesn't collapse on your new design." I couldn't help but smile. "Then you're the one I need to impress," he chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Then we'll get along fine." We did more than that. We found a rhythm. Ethan was everything my family wasn't. Steady, deliberate, patient. He didn't talk to fill the silence. He made the silence feel safe. We worked side by side for weeks. We crawled through the dusty attic space, measuring beams. We sat cross-legged on the warped hardwood floors, debating layouts, sketching new ideas on scraps of drywall and plywood. He'd watch me, his head tilted, as I'd get lost in a design. One day, I was crouched on the floor, redrawing a sightline for the third time, frustrated. He handed me a water bottle. "You forget the world when you work," he said. I smiled without looking up. "That's kind of the point." He hesitated, then said, "You look at a house like it has a soul, like you're trying to find what it wants to be." I looked up at him then. He wasn't mocking me, he was just observing. He saw it. He saw the part of me my father called strange. When the project ended, he invited me to dinner. Not a date, exactly, just dinner. We went to a small Italian restaurant near Sloan's Lake. The place was warm, smelled of garlic and yeast. Over plates of pasta and glasses of red wine, we talked. Not just about buildings, but about fear, about failure, about the strange, quiet peace of starting over. I told him everything. About losing my job. About walking away from my family after the $150,000 dinner. About the failure label. He listened. He just listened, his gray eyes focused on me. He didn't pity me. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He just nodded, and when I was finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't need their approval, Wendy. You already built something they can't touch." A few weeks later, he called. "I have a crazy idea," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You ever thought about designing a home that generates its own energy? A sustainable model. Small, simple, self-sufficient." I froze. My hand tightened on the phone. That was it. That was the dream. The one I'd sketched in my college notebooks. The one I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten it was there. The one I'd mentioned to my dad once, who'd scoffed and called it a risky pipe dream. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have." "Then maybe it's time," he replied. We called it the Eco Home Project. It was one thing to dream it in Denver, it was another thing to build it. We spent months searching for the right place, far from the life I'd left behind, far from the shadows of the mountains that had watched me fail. We found it in Oregon, a small, 5-acre plot overlooking the ocean. It was raw, overgrown with pine and wild blackberry bushes. The owner, George, was an older man with kind, sad eyes and a quiet demeanor. He walked the property line with us, his hands deep in his pockets. "I planned to build a home here once," he said, his voice soft, looking out at the water. "My wife, she loved this view, but she passed before I could even clear the land." We told him our plan, not a mansion, but a single, 600 square foot sustainable model, a house that lived with the land, not on top of it. He nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. "The listing price is $120,000, he said, "but I'll sell it to you for $75,000. I just stared at him. "George, we can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he said, still looking at the ocean. "My wife would have liked what you're doing. You too. You'll make it something worth living in." My savings from my design work covered about half. Before I could even start the agonizing math, Ethan wrote the check for the rest. I looked at him, my throat tight. "Ethan." "No strings, Wendy," he said, his voice firm. "Just partnership." We set up a small canvas tent near the clearing. We were really doing this. The first few weeks were brutal. The air was different here. The pines whispered constantly, a sound like a soft shushing. The wind off the ocean was relentless, carrying the sharp, clean scent of salt and damp rain. We worked from sunup to sundown. We brewed bitter coffee on a tiny portable stove. We cleared stones until our hands were raw. We dug and poured the foundation ourselves, mixing the concrete by hand. I was a structural engineer. I knew how this worked on paper. But the physical reality of it, the ache in my back, the blisters that formed and broke and formed again, this was different. We named it the Evergreen Cabin. Every piece of it was deliberate, 600 square feet, a roof angled perfectly for the solar panels, a rainwater catchment system that fed a cistern. For the interior, we found a local dismantled barn and bought the wood-aged, beautiful, weathered timber that we sanded down ourselves. Everything was sustainable. Everything was reclaimed. Everything was built from what the world had discarded, just like me. Some days I wanted to quit. My fingers would crack from the cold and the wet. My body ached in places I didn't know I had. But every night, sitting by the small fire, I'd look at the rising frame of our little house, dark against the stars. By month 10, it was complete. It was small, but it felt perfect. The pale, reclaimed wood, the wide, simple windows that faced the sea, a porch that opened toward the forest. When the sunlight hit it just right, the whole cabin seemed to glow, like it had its own heartbeat. My whole body was a geography of new muscles and old bruises. But I'd never felt stronger. I sat by the fire, looking at what we'd built, and thought, this is it. This is what it feels like to rebuild yourself from the foundation up. I took a single photo on my phone, just the cabin, glowing in the late afternoon light. My heart was pounding. This was the moment, the decisive action. I opened my social media, an account I hadn't touched in almost a year. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't write a long, angry story. I just posted the photo, and I wrote 5 simple words as the caption. Built this myself. I hit share. Then I put my phone down and went to go sit on the porch with Ethan. I didn't look at it for the rest of the night. I didn't need to. By the next morning, my phone had melted down. The post had been shared thousands of times. It had gone viral. The comments weren't just congrats. They were messages from strangers. You made me believe again. I left a toxic home. This gives me hope. You turned pain into something beautiful. For the first time in my life, the world saw me. Not as a failure, not as the strange one. They saw me the way I had always hoped my parents would. The viral post was one thing. Real life was another. It was a quiet May morning, about a month later. The sun was soft, streaming through the pines, and the lavender I'd planted along the porch was just starting to bloom, its scent mixing with the salt from the ocean. I was on my knees in the dirt, gardening gloves on, a small trowel in my hand, when I heard it. The sound of tires screeching on our gravel road, a sound so out of place in our quiet world that I froze. A silver BMW, a new one, stopped just short of the simple wooden gate. The driver's door flew open, and a woman stepped out. It was Jessica. She looked the same. Perfectly styled, expensive white dress, immaculate hair, but she was trembling. Her phone was pressed to her ear, her voice shaky and high. Dad, you need to come here now. No, I'm serious. I stood up slowly, pulling off my dirt-caked gloves. Jess, what's going on? She froze. Her head snapped toward me. She stared, her eyes sweeping from my face, to my old jeans, to the cabin behind me. The solar panels, the wildflowers, the wisp of smoke from the chimney. Her jaw just dropped. Wendy? You live here? Her voice was a whisper. They said you lost everything, that you ran off. I smiled, a small, faint smile. Guess they were wrong. She looked from me to the house, and for a moment, all that perfect confidence just crumbled. After my divorce, I moved back home. I hadn't even known she was divorced. They still pay for everything, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears she angrily brushed away. The car, my apartment, everything. Mom just keeps saying, don't be reckless like your sister. And I listen. I always listen. She ran a hand over the smooth wood of the gatepost, as if to see if it was real. She looked back at me, her face a mask of confusion and something that looked like envy. You have everything, she whispered. And I don't even know who I am anymore. Before I could answer, another car appeared. The big, black SUV. My father stepped out first. His face was flushed, veins showing at his neck. Mom followed, trembling, clutching her purse. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just stalked toward the gate, his eyes scanning the cabin, the land, the solar panels. Where did you get the money for this? He demanded. You expect me to believe you built all this alone? I set down my gloves. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I met his eyes. The old, familiar fear was gone. I started building it, I said, my voice perfectly even, from the day you called me a failure. He blinked, confused. All those years, I continued. Every insult you threw at me. Every time you compared me to her. Every time you made me feel small. That was capital. My work, my grit, my peace. Things you could never touch and could never take. And this, I jested at the cabin, at the life I'd built, is what I built with it. You did this to humiliate us, he spat, his face turning a darker red. No, I said quietly, and this was the final boundary. I did this to survive you. The air grew thick. The only sound was the ocean in the distance and the wind in the pines. Then, the cabin door opened. Ethan stepped out, calm as always, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't say a word. He just nodded politely to my parents before coming to stand right beside me. A steady, wordless, solid wall of support. For the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of something new in my father's eyes. Not anger, not pride, shame. His shoulders dropped. His bluster deflated, leaving an old, tired man in its place. "We were wrong," he said, his voice so low I barely heard it. Mom finally broke, crying quietly into her hands. I didn't move closer. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't need to. "I don't need to forgive you to be free," I said, and the words were as much for me as for them. "I already am." They left soon after. The SUV disappeared down the gravel road, and the forest grew still again. I stood on the porch, my heart pounding, not from anger, but from release. A week later, a cream-colored envelope arrived. No return address, just my name in my father's careful handwriting. Inside was a short letter and a photo. The photo was of our old house, the one I grew up in. It had a for sale sign out front. His words were unsteady, the ink slightly shaky. "We loved you in the wrong way, through fear, through comparison. We're starting over, and for the first time, we are proud of you." I didn't cry. I didn't write back. I just folded the letter, walked outside where the air smelled of pine and rain, and I planted a young tree near the porch. A new beginning, rooted in peace. Ethan stepped beside me as I was tamping down the soil. He was holding a small, dark walnut box, one he'd carved himself from the first tree we had to cut down to build the cabin. "Wendy Bennett," he said, his voice quiet, his gray eyes steady on mine. He opened the box. Inside was a simple, perfect ring, carved from the same dark wood. "Will you keep building with me?" I laughed, and this time, the tears came. Tears of joy, only if we draw the blueprint together. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the forest, I wrote one final line in my journal. They gave Jessica $150,000. They gave me silence, but silence became my foundation. Sometimes, revenge isn't about making them pay. It's about letting them see you happy without ever needing their approval. My parents gave me silence, but that silence taught me everything about strength, boundaries, and the right to build your own peace. If you've ever been told you'll never make it, if you've ever been made to feel small, I hope my story reminds you that you can build a life from the ground up, one that no one can ever take away from you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And if this story hit home for you, hit subscribe, share it, and stay for the next one. You're not alone.